Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation, the Car Company Tycoon game. Continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in a new year period, this time 2011. Now, in my previous video, I only did one model for 2006 because I didn't think that there would be that many changes from 2002 to 2006. There would be some minor ones, but not enough that I thought it justified redoing every single model. So I added on one model, but now I'm going to be addressing every model for 2011. And we're going to start off with the small economy car in the Edison Car Company's lineup, the Edison Luna. Now, I've had a little bit of issues, and I was actually worried whether or not I'd even be able to get a video for this week because there was an update that caused a lot of bugs in the game. And during that issue with the bugs, I decided to go ahead and just design a lot of the models ahead of time. I did as much as I could until I encountered the bug that wouldn't allow me to proceed. And then I stopped and I went on to the next model. And I did almost every model for 2011. But if you were looking at my screen there was only two models. That's because they fixed the bug very recently. I'm not exactly sure when that occurred, but very recently they fixed the bug. The bug was in the factory setup tab when you would go to select a person for the project in the factory, a leader of that factory. It would just kick you out back to the sandbox menu, and you couldn't progress if you wanted to select anyone for that factory. So at that moment, I just kind of put that on hold, and I did everything else. Well, after fixing the bug, more or less it wiped out everything I did for the 2011 year, so I had to start over from scratch. But that is kind of the price of doing business with an early access game. Sometimes updates will wipe save files, so I'm not too surprised by that. It's a little bit bothersome, but we'll just come back and redo things to the best of our ability. And I learned some things along the way, and honestly, I feel like I actually built the cars better this time round. Well, let's start off from the beginning. For the chassis setup, I went with a monocoque chassis made out of AHS steel, front transverse mount for the engine, McPherson strut suspension in the front, and torsion beam in the rear. And I have a little bit of a difference here this time around for the Luna, making the panel material out of partial aluminum. And you can see a direct comparison to corrosion-resistant steel, which is what we used in the past. So we gain a little bit in production units. We have a little bit more there. But where we really gain out, at least benefit-wise, is in a reduction in weight, which is pretty significant. We lose out a little bit in tooling cost, as well as a reduction in safety. Otherwise, more or less the same. As far as styling goes, honestly, I did kind of slap things together a little bit more than I usually would this time round because of trying to just get things together after losing all of my data, but keeping things simple as I usually do, but covering all the bases. Transverse front-wheel drive for the drive type. And let's take a look at the engine. So I have a 1.8-liter inline 4 with aluminum silicone block and head. We have a single overhead cam with 3 valves per cylinder and VVL. The cast crank, I-beam steel for conrods and forged pistons. The variant capacity is the same. We have the compression cam profile and VVL profile here, and I also have VVT as well. This is naturally aspirated. And I used a direct injection, this is the first year period that I'm going to be using direct injection, and most of my engines are going to be using direct injection, if not all of them. I have a single throttle, standard intake, and I'm using regular fuel. Fuel mixture comes in at 14.9, ignition timing at 50, and RPM limit at 7,500. Exhaust, we have short cast, single exhaust, one 3-way cat, and a reverse flow muffler to reduce that noise, and 2-inch exhaust diameter. And the end result of all that is 133 horsepower and 114 foot-pounds of torque. My objective here is to come very close to the power ratings we were getting with the 2-liter engine from the previous year period, which was roughly around 135 horsepower. So even though we have a reduction in displacement, only a slight reduction in horsepower. We're able to keep it pretty close, but also keep the thing very fuel efficient. And that's one thing that I really strive for in this year period, as that is a demand of the designers of cars at this period, is to keep things fuel efficient. All right, so taking a look at the gearbox, and this is one of the things that they changed with the recent update, is how the gearbox works. And I'd like to demonstrate that here. So keep an eye on the top speed, the estimated top speed here. As I adjust things, you notice how the bar actually moves there? That is a new adjustment they've made, and I think, I kind of like that setup. For the gearbox setup for this trim, I have a manual transmission with 5 speeds. And my estimated top speed is set up so that that fifth gear goes a little bit beyond the estimated top speed, which is a little bit trickier now with this new change because it will move around on you, but it does go beyond that estimated top speed a little bit, which improves fuel economy. So the numbers that we end up getting is 32.4 miles per gallon and a 0 to 62 time of 10.1 seconds. And we have a little bit of wheel spin with 4.5%. My tire setup, I have medium compound road, 16-inch rim diameter that is steel rim material, and 185 in both front and rear for the tire width. Brake setup, I have a solid disc one piston setup up front with 325s for the size, and the pad type, I went pretty aggressive because, as you can see here with the bar for the braking, I wasn't quite getting enough braking here. So without that more aggressive pad setup, I was actually below that line. So to improve overall handling and performance overall, I did increase that. And also, I brought the pad aggressiveness down in the rear to try and mitigate the lockup. Now, I didn't mess too much with the brake size in the rear because the balance of brake fade and the benefits of reducing its size were, once you have ABS, kind of don't give you much of a benefit. I went with fully clad under tray for the aerodynamics, and cooling airflow, I went with approximately 10 above required. For the interior setup, I have 5 seats, standard interior, standard CD, and I ticked all of the driver assist. And there's a reason for this, and this is a reason why I'm working on specifically the 2011 model year, because in the United States, there was a regulation that required all 2011 model year cars to have all of these driver assists as standard. So ABS, traction control, electronic stability control, all became standard, driving the cost of base models like this up pretty significantly, but also improving, safety and drivability possibly as well. And we have standard safety. Now, for the suspension setup, I have standard springs, twin tube dampers, and passive sway bars, and this is my suspension setup. Let's take a look at the test track here. So top speed comes in at 132.1 miles an hour, and this actually reflects what we see here now. So as I said, before they made a change here, the number that you would see here was the estimated top speed, but it would never really match up with what you saw here in the test track. And now those numbers actually match. So that's another nice thing. You can actually predict a little bit more what kind of top speed you're going to see. And there were ways I could have made this higher by adjusting that gearbox around, which you might have saw as I was showing you. It comes in around a little under 3,000 pounds. We're a little front heavy, but this is a front wheel drive car, so that's not too outside the norm. We already discussed the 0 to 62 time here. Cornering G's wise, this doesn't look too good, I would say, but let's see what the test track tells us. All right, so the time we get is 1 minute 39.89. Let's jump into the next trim, which is going to be an automatic transmission version of the 1.8 liter powered trim. And let's go straight to the gearbox. So we have an automatic, but we have a little bit of a difference this time around. We have a 6-speed automatic, and we're actually having more gears than we do with the manual transmission, which in the past, it was the other way around. So for the gearbox setup, I have the fifth and sixth gear are going beyond that estimated top speed, which is lower because I've made the gearbox not quite as aggressive. We do see a 0 to 62 time drop off, pretty significant. We could probably try and adjust that around, but unfortunately, as you can see here, that's a little bit tricky as we kind of hit a sweet spot there that it's probably going to require a lot of adjustment and wheel spin before we get to a similar 0 to 62 time, as you can see. And we're dropping down our fuel economy quite a bit, and that kind of defeats the purpose of why we have these the 6-speed gearbox. So let's get it back to that point of having a 0 to 62 time of 10.7 seconds, a little bit quicker, well, definitely quicker than what we could have done, but definitely slower, on the other hand, than the manual transmission. But this is the normal trend we see. We usually lose a decent amount when we switch from a manual transmission to an automatic transmission. Fuel economy comes in at 31.9 miles per gallon, so not quite as good with the manual transmission, but closer for sure. And our wheel spin comes in at 5.9%, so I think a little bit more than what we saw before. Tire setup is the same, as is the brake setup, although there might be a little bit of slight difference. No, it looks about the same to me. Cooling airflow should be the same as well because it's the same engine, as is the interior. Suspension should be roughly about the same as well. But the test track is where we're going to see some differences. So we're gaining weight, roughly around 30 pounds if I'm remembering correctly, and we're gaining a little bit more, making it more front heavy in any case. We lose some in top speed because of the way I set up my gearbox, so it's 125.7 miles per hour as opposed to 132 from before. And cornering Gs look roughly the same at a cursory glance. So let's see our track time. We can assume this is going to be definitely slower. And it is indeed. 1 minute 41.69. But again, this is the kind of deviation that we typically see from that switch from manual transmission to an automatic transmission, although this is almost 2 seconds, so pretty significant loss there. Let's take a look at our last trim, which is going to be a difference in engine. So let's take a look at the engine. This is a 1.4 liter inline 4 engine, so we have a lower displacement engine. Aluminum silicone block and head. Dual overhead cam with 4 valves per cylinder as opposed to the single overhead cam with 3 valves per cylinder. We have cast iron crank, cast iron conrods, and low friction cast. Now, this engine is all about fuel economy, trying to maximize that, and low friction cast gives you high fuel efficiency, so that's why we selected that. This is my compression cam profile and VVL profile, and this does have VVT all cams. This is a turbocharged engine, again trying to go with the fuel economy route, but also trying to bring the performance close to the numbers we were getting with that higher displacement engine. It's not quite as high as that, but it's close enough, and that's what we're going for. So that's why it's turbocharged, and this is kind of a trend you see in the 2010s, is this transition to EcoBoost engines, and the trim itself is called the 1.4 Eco, so that's what we're going for sure. And I have a direct injection again, single throttle, standard intake, but I'm using premium fuel rather than regular. And I actually toyed with this idea of whether I should stick with regular fuel or go to premium. And from what I saw, the downside of going premium is you have more running costs to the consumer. But the upside is you get more fuel economy. So I just went for the more fuel economy route, or you can allow for more fuel economy and higher performance. So that's why I went that route. But you could go either way. And initially I did design this engine with regular fuel, but I ended up changing my mind when I saw the comparison of the running cost to the consumer. Fuel mixture is set all the way down to 15, ignition timing up to 60, and RPM limit at 7,100. Now with that low friction cast, you can't rev the engine quite as high as you can with, for instance, the forged pistons that are in the standard engine. So I do have to bring that down a bit. And I have to tailor engine for that as well. Now, as far as the exhaust setup goes, 2-inch diameter, high flow 3-way cat as opposed to just a 3-way cat, and a straight through muffler. This wasn't that loud of an engine, so I didn't think it justified having a reverse flow, which you can see quiets it down quite a bit more. But this engine, even with a straight through muffler, is definitely quieter than the naturally aspirated engine. With all that said, the performance we get is 121 horsepower and 124 foot-pounds of torque. Let's go ahead and jump into the trim here. So this is going to be still having an automatic transmission. We don't have a manual transmission version. Now, I could get even more fuel economy if I went with the manual transmission with the way that the game works, but I decided to go with the automatic transmission because I felt like that was more true to life of what you would think the consumer would want, at least in the United States. In any case, as I said, automatic transmission, 6-speed gearbox, and this gearbox is set up very similarly. So the 5th and 6th gear go beyond the estimated top speed. The 0 to 62 time, though, comes at 11.1 seconds, which is understandable considering that we have less power to work with than we did with the 1.8-liter engine. And we do lose quite a lot in drivability, and that's due to, you're going to get that with any turbocharged engine. Whenever you're using a turbocharged engine in the game, because of these, bendy lines you get here with your power curves, you have a tendency of really dropping off in drivability, getting a big penalty to your drivability because of the engine. And I think a large part of that is because you have a turbocharged engine. The tire setup is the same. We do have more wheel spin than we did in the other trims. The brake setup is more or less the same as well. Cooling airflow had to be adjusted slightly, but not a big difference. Only, I think it was required cooling of 90 before. Now we have roughly 97. So a little bit of a tick up there in required cooling airflow, but not a big amount. Interior is the same. I expect the suspension to be roughly the same as well. Although there should be some differences because of the difference in weight. Let's take a look at the test track. So we've dropped down in top speed a little bit here, down to 124.6 miles an hour. Weight has gone up to a little bit over 3,000 pounds. I think we're roughly about as front heavy as we were before, but I would assume a little bit more front heavy. According to G's, look about the same, but because of the lower top speed and lower acceleration numbers, I think we can expect this to be the slowest numbers we've gotten so far. You can hear that turbocharger spooling up there. So we've got 1 minute 42.86, so we lost more than a second between the naturally aspirated engine and the turbocharged engine, but again, we have less power to work with. But where we gained out is in that fuel economy for sure. If we go back to the overview, you see that the economy is almost 42 miles per gallon. So big benefits there. Moving on to the project setup, there are still obviously bugs here, as this person's image, rather than being a person's picture, is just a blue and pink square. And I consider this part of the game very much still in development, at least I hope so, with the images of the team members. But in any case, as far as the project setup goes, it's more of an efficiency setup for the project, both engine and model. For the factory setup, I went with a large factory, which is my standard setup for the most part. And as far as production goes, between the trims, I figured that the two automatic trims would be the most popular, the naturally aspirated one being the most popular, and then behind that, the eco-engined automatic transmission trim, and then the manual transmission trim being the least desired of the bunch. And I went with as many shifts as I could and an automation of 80 to get my production up, and the end result of that is 914 cars a day. For my first engine factory, it's a large factory. And one thing that I didn't notice, and I guess that I messed up here, Oh, I must have not done the setup here, so I guess we'll do that now. So this is the turbocharged engine. But one thing that they've added on that I've noticed, and maybe I was wrong in not seeing this before, but they actually tell you how many required engines you need for a particular trim and how many engines you're producing. So what we're going to do is just bring that number on down until we get it to where it is matching that number. There we go, or at least exceeding it, so we have enough to go off of. And moving on to the next engine. So this is going to be the naturally aspirated engine. Again, large factory. And again, it doesn't look like I set up the shifts, so I must have forgotten to do that. In any case, we see again required 612 and the actual engines we're producing with 80 automation. So we'll just bring those shifts down until we get it to a point where we're just matching what we need, which looks about right about there. Okay, and so that's a really nice feature. You don't have to flip back and forth. You can just look at that number, see how many you need, and match the engines correspondingly. All right, so let's go on to the market data, starting off with the 1.8 trim with the manual transmission and a 5% markup. So our end cost is $14,500. And the three market segments we're doing the best in is city economy, city, and fun. And honestly, these two market segments is exactly where I want to be hitting. And I'm also thinking that it's possible that they change some things with the market data, with the affordability, something that I have complained about in the past. So it's good to see that because these numbers look a little bit more appropriate to what we expect. But we're also doing very well in the commuter category, another segment we'd like to do well, family category, and yet another segment we'd like to do well in, and family sport, not really trying. And we always do well in the pony segment regardless of what we build, as I've always said. Okay, let's move on to the next trim, which is the automatic transmission. Now, I could be wrong with the market data here and a change here, but it seems like that's the case, at least so far with the two models I've made since these recent updates. So the three market segments we're hitting now are still the city being our strongest, then the commuter and family segments. So we're a little bit more expensive here with the automatic transmission, and we're hitting a little bit different market segments as a result, but also of difference performance. But we're still doing pretty darn well in the city economy segment, as well as some of the other segments we were hitting before. Not so well in the pony segment as we were before, but 97.1 isn't bad, honestly. So I guess not too badly. And finally, we have the eco engine, which I assume we're going to do well in that city economy segment, and we do indeed, as well as the commuter segment. So commuter is our strongest, and I'm going to assume that has to do with economy. Yeah, 18.7% of the commuter makeup is due to economy, and that is the same numbers we get for city economies. I'm sorry, commuter, and city economy is the same. So that's why we're having strong showings here, but we're also having strong showings in the family segment, actually doing better than the city economy segment, even though economy isn't as big of a factor there. And again, we're doing well in the pony segment regardless, but city segment also a strong category for us. It looks like we've dropped off, though, overall in performance. I'm going to assume a lot of that is due to the big drop in drivability that we see with the switch to the turbocharged engine, which is a price you pay when you do a setup like that. And you could argue that possibly, the turbocharged EcoBoost engine doesn't really work all that well in the game with the way it's set up currently. And honestly, you could argue it doesn't work too well in real life, too, because there is something to be said for that. In any case, what we end up getting, looking overall, is the most drivability with automatic transmission, naturally aspirated engine, which we expect. And that's really, honestly, good numbers, 56. I think, we're getting up there more and more as we progress through the years. Sportiness is at its best with the manual transmission, but that's not too surprising either, as you do get a bonus with the manual transmission and a penalty for automatic transmissions. As far as comfort, we get the most with the EcoBoost engine, which is actually a little bit surprising. And we get prestige highest for the EcoBoost engine as well. Safety is pretty much the same across the board because there's not that big of a difference in weight. I mean, there is a difference, but I don't think it's significant enough that we're getting that much of a difference in safety. As far as practicality goes, we're getting pretty much the same numbers across the board. Off-road ability, the automatics have a little bit of an advantage. As far as utility, it looks like, again, the automatics have a little bit of an advantage, with the naturally aspirated engined automatic having the best performance. And reliability goes manual transmission naturally aspirated, automatic naturally aspirated, and then turbocharged as the last. But they are pretty darn close together, and our worst one being 72, I think is still pretty darn good performance. And that's something that we always expect out of the Luna, is for it to be a little bit more reliable. At least that's the way I try and build it. Now, as far as fuel economy goes, 32 miles per gallon for both automatic and manual transmission, so we're able to get... Now, I think there is still a slight edge, though, with the manual transmission if you actually look at the specific numbers. But with it rounded like this, they are very darn close. And that's what we're trying to get now with the automatic transmission. We're trying to get closer to what you can get with the manual transmission, if not exceeding what you can get with the manual transmission. And we'll continue to do that as time goes on. And our EcoBoost engine definitely does its job, getting 42 miles per gallon. Now, one thing I guess I'm pretty sure I forgot to mention in the aerodynamics that I added onto the Eco trim was cooling flaps, which does give you a little bit better aerodynamics for that fuel economy. So you can see the direct difference here. So we're getting a little bit better performance there with the cooling flaps as far as fuel economy is concerned, which is, again, what we're going for with this trim, why we have that set up. Okay, jumping back into our comparison here. Weight, we already discussed. As far as emissions go, it's in the favor of our EcoBoost engine. Again, something we're going for with the setup of this engine is to be more fuel efficient and environmentally friendly. And our manual transmission has a slight edge over the automatic transmission for the way that we set the two different gearboxes up. As far as production units go, this goes in the way you would think it would. So manual transmission requiring the least, our naturally aspirated automatic transmission the next most, and then our turbocharged engine the most after that. And cost goes in that order as well. So not too surprising there. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.